A terrifying red twilight washes over the sky, turning every corner into a bloody tomb waiting for its next victim. A man has been nailed to the wall and is already dying of blood loss as his eyes shut out the world around him. He looked up, smiled defiantly, and yelled loudly to order his opponent to hit him. Before that monstrous figure, whose hands are bristling with dangerous blades, the shadowy darkness begins to fall. His face was wrapped in a yellow cloth that looked like a sacred talisman, hiding all the secrets behind its protective cover. A mysterious figure emerges from a gap, its eyes filled with an ethereal glow as it leaps into action. He stares through the stormy sky with such a cold look that he thinks death isn't even real. A thunderous explosion erupts, instantly turning the dark sky into a blazing sea of fire. It was the final straw for that legendary hero who stood against all odds, and now he has lost his last chance to save everyone else by falling into this endless abyss of ruin. In reality, what everyone calls a novel is actually just a long story that we've written right now to tell our friends about life. A sleepy young man in plain clothes sprawls out on his bed like a lazy cat before the sun rises. He sighed in boredom and gave up on the next chapter of his world. He looked at his phone, saw nothing but his name and a high score, and muttered it was just him reading alone. He tossed the phone aside after sending the message and laughed out loud as he walked along. The stranger staring at his phone was completely ignored as he decided to go where the signals came from. That clean morning routine didn't end when the bell rang. Instead, the next day proved that confidence alone can't stop chaos. He walked with his usual sharpness, yet the noise of life snapped him back to attention. He rubbed his face as he whispered, "I think a big corporation needs to bring chaos into this market crash." It was too dark to see him when the building disappeared completely, leaving behind nothing but empty earth. As a dozen people gather around, their whispers fill the air with soft sounds of pleading and thanks echoing through the room. On the ground, a strange number stands out, making him suspect something far more sinister than he ever imagined. He stares in disbelief as his new flat turns into a dumpster, while angry neighbors erupt at the nearby skyscraper that is crashing down faster than it can be built. At school, he was so shocked to find that the classroom was packed with more than 16 groups of students. He steps through the heavy classroom doors with surprising speed, letting the rush of unseen footsteps fill the quiet air. It was the very excited blonde-haired friend who hugged him so tightly that he felt safe and loved for being himself. Chongding whispered, "Oh, the world ends soon," as he revealed his identity to the frightened friend who was hiding behind a wall. Chongding stares blankly after his friend, who keeps playing until dawn while the guy in the blue shirt says he's busy and calls it a day. He leaned forward and stared at Chongding with a wide, excited grin, hoping his bold words would finally make him speak again. Online, angry comments flood about a strange building collapse, with news spreading so fast that people cry over lost wedding homes and question how one night could bring destruction. The blonde friend triumphantly claims it's happening nationwide, while Chongding reluctantly thinks it is merely chance, whispering to his friend as if he was reading omens before monsters appeared in the novel. Chongding feels a sudden rush of electricity in his soul because he has been reading too many long stories and suddenly realizes that his life is just another chapter waiting to happen. He grabbed his phone right away and made a loud noise saying, "Oh no, the apocalypse is here." But even though he was so terrified, he never stopped reading stories instead. Chongding looked at the book and immediately felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that this time he would never have to deal with any more trouble. He suddenly stumbles back, remembering how a book said mysterious buildings were disappearing from their homes one by one. He shuddered, not in fear, but because his own words were telling him that the world was about to collapse under its own weight. Panicking and clutching his backpack tight, Chongding suddenly yanked away from the classroom before anyone else could even ask if he could go home. The little blonde girl shatters her smile as she cries over the news, loud enough to make everyone pause, because she's officially ready to take her time back now. He ran across the street, so fast his lungs burned back when he remembered how those empty squares had been swallowed by monsters from a forgotten book. So when the book turns out to be right, then that base drops down into a true abyss and shifts rank number 1. Chongding sprinted forward, his gaze snapping sharply as he caught a giant number written right on the dirt. He gasped in exhaustion as he confirmed that this was truly his first deep dive into the void. A weary old man, stumbling through the crowd, felt his life suddenly ending as he lost his home. Yet with embarrassment rising, he forced a grin and admitted that living on the edge was simply not enough for him. Chongding stood up and whispered, "Oh no, that is an abyss shift, something truly mysterious with no known cause." He remembered a book that said if you turn on 900 switches everywhere across the country, they would all start at number 0, creating a disaster. Then suddenly, A horde of wild, scary monsters appeared in the dark at night and started eating everything around them. The doors slammed wide, welcoming visitors from every corner of the universe, each one a unique adventure waiting for them to solve. The abyss was a place where creatures of terrifying size and wild strength lived, and as they grew deeper into the dark depths, their frightening form became even more monstrous and dangerous for everyone to see. While at the lowest levels of a battle, people might still use guns and missiles, but once you got past level 11, plain old stuff just couldn't stand a shot anymore. There were only two paths left to follow. One was a deadly hunt to grab treasures hidden in a strange realm, and the other was a dangerous escape route through the dark forest where you could never return home. In a world where magic and powerful guns made only a tiny fraction of humans live, finding these incredible gifts was all humanity needed to stay alive. In the deepest void of level 1, that colossal beast appeared not merely as a wolf or a dog, but as a terrifyingly large and slow dog who would bite with an easy, savage grace. Chong Ding grabbed the opportunity to grab a chance at the first prize, treating this moment like an easy win. The guy remembers a cool guy he once met who wore nothing but clothes, got big boosts for doing great things, and was so strong it took him alone to defeat a tough boss at the 3rd level. His grip tightened around the bag as a shiver ran through him because he didn't know what would happen next. He roared out loud on the busy street, shouting that survival meant no escape at all, while strangers whispered, "He's crazy." Before hesitating, he sprinted straight into a supermarket eager for disaster gear. The shopkeeper smiled and hurriedly checked on his list, knowing that the long pole he had picked up was actually just another weapon for fighting those scary monsters. She picked up a stack of metal sheets and wrapped them tightly around herself like an ugly but effective disguise. It was so tight she nearly missed her schoolgirl passing by, leaving the whole group standing in silence. A bright pink-haired girl steps in front of him and gently yells, "Hey, don't skip school." The phone on his hip is vibrating so hard it's shaking him right now. The screen flickered and showed 2 words, "A beloved father." As he answers, his father's anxious roar makes her mother rush back home for urgent matters. He rushed forward to ask if he should wait, but she glanced back at him with a look of secret surprise as she turned and disappeared. He lay back in his bedroom and started putting together all those new weapons for him to use. He's a bit skinny at first, but when he lifts his shirt to reveal those well-defined muscles, it looks like a brave hero putting on his own special gear. He grabbed the heavy metal sheath by its jagged edge and snapped it shut, looking down with an almost cartoonish grin as he held up the bizarre toy that looked like a pig's face. Outside, the city glows bright as night falls. Only 2 hours are left until midnight. He stood alone on the street wearing a dazzling red cloak, clutching his makeshift spear, striking the perfect, out-of-place contrast against nothing but the night air. The air tightens around him as he steps over a line of people, ready to take that win. As the winter chill picks up the quiet room, the clock hands in his pocket begin to spin toward nothing but time running out. The clock hands finally stop, and that's when he launches into his most dramatic dance move, while shouting the countdown up to 11. In an eerie flash of lightning, the earth shatters like broken glass and erupts into a terrifying storm where towering black tentacles dart about, shaking the very sky away with a roar that sounds exactly like a scream from the depths. So from that page, everything makes up a circle, a kind of magical spell called a summoning ritual. A massive explosion sends a beam of white-hot red energy shooting straight for Earth, instantly turning the entire moon into a jagged, bleeding piece of stone that looks like it's trying to swallow you whole. Across the city, millions of beams shoot up like a storm toward the heavens, signaling that doom is about to strike. It was Chong Ding's first real-world encounter with the terrifying thing he saw, and his heart began to pound in a tight, fearful rhythm as the shadows grew long around him. A horn-covered dog sprouts from a rift in space and looks like an untamed beast of fear. He was chewing greedily on the food he had been eating for hours, pulling his body into tight muscles while the cape stretched out behind him as if it were part of a heroic pose. He analyzed how fast those level 1 monsters charge up, so when he tried to dodge their first jump and counted them on their flank, they did die. He reminded himself to stay calm, imagining what would happen if the main character had run away earlier. In a tight block of silence, both he and the beast lock eyes on one another, their fangs and drooling gums shining like polished diamonds while they sweat profusely as he patiently waits for just the perfect chance to strike. The beast didn't pause. It surged forward to unleash its deadly attack. He watches the train carefully because a single error in his watch means he dies today. The gun snaps back when the enemy's charge hits him hard, causing a deafening screech as he desperately grabs his own arm to stop falling backward. Oh, The old man's belly feels like it's about to burst open with the sound of a sharp knife cutting through his skin, and suddenly he thinks to himself, "Let me eat all this delicious dog meat." As the beast shivers and crumbles, Chongding gasps for air before erupting into a triumphant cheer. His long, snout-dragging body slumped across the dusty floor, looking as though he were about to give up, trying to be alive just for a moment. The story says the deep stone must fall, yet he finds no trace of it when he looks around. He realized it and pressed his lips shut, instantly turning into a dazzling smile that felt exactly like the light of a bright poster. He sat on the dirt and sneered at the monster, trying to break its act of acting like an enemy. The taunt sparked a fire that shook his body like a wounded animal. Then he roared, fell apart into ash, and vanished under the dignity of death. Two strange things fall away when they leave the world behind. He smiles down in a sudden rush of relief, realizing that once he had killed the first abyss breed, he now holds the crown of solitude. He was so happy and shouted, "The opening task is done," while looking around at the prize. The computer asked, "Do you want to turn that title on?" And he simply nodded without a second glance. And suddenly, a wild spirit bursts into the room. As soon as he lights up, his body swells into a glowing wolf shape that vibrates beneath the moonlight, keeping the noise completely quiet, so no one in the city feels threatened by it. No matter how soft the sound is, he always roars so hard that it fills the whole room. He has a thick, glowing red-black shadow wrapping around him that looks like an energy sphere. As the magic around him slowly dissipates, he remains perfectly safe and whole. A lone spotlight was finally turned on for your special title. Strength grew 5-fold while body durability spiked 10-fold as the user launched with a thunderous impact, slamming their fists together to feel that electric surge of newfound power. He breathed a deep sigh of relief and finally declared that giving the first prize was truly worth every bit of sweat on the field. He hits the ground hard and warps it into a mess of dirt. He watched the punch fly by and instantly felt nothing but comfort, as if his heart had never been hurt at all. He held his breath as the sun dipped below the horizon, feeling that tiny black hole tighten up until a powerful roar was about to erupt from deep within. The thunderous blow shatters the pavement and creates a dark hole, big enough to swallow a whole person. He was truly amazed by the sheer power he possessed, which went far beyond what anyone could have imagined before. After giving his first gift, he went back and looked at the two last items left behind for him to take home. He picked up the round, shiny stone with zero hesitation, swallowing it whole. The computer said he now has the power to grab things that aren't alive. He felt a little disappointed with his weak skills, but decided he could use them anyway. He raised his massive blade and suddenly revealed a terrifyingly weak enemy, which made him gain immense strength while slowly draining 1% of his maximum health every single day from bleeding out. His smile reveals how he navigates that dangerous balance between gaining strength and losing his life's work. He felt supercharged by his new title and was already ready for the big day. As the sun fades into a gentle twilight, the stormy heat of the day truly ends with a sigh of relief. As the sun began to rise and the classroom door clicked open, the air exploded with a chaotic buzz of laughter and shouting, making him feel like a little storm in his new world. A mischievous friend bursts into the room, clutching his head and sneering, looking absolutely prepared for some serious mischief. Chongding's quick dodge turned a tight evening into a tumble, causing him to lose his footing and crash straight against the wall. Chongding's nervous smile hides the man in the shadows as the move forces him to stare back with a wary expression. The chatterbox was excited as he shouted that the world's internet was finally cracking down on evil news, waving a phone right in front of the camera to show it all. The man laughed as if a picture was right beside him, telling everyone that a stranger had gone missing overseas and all other photos were erased, only to quietly choose one for himself instead. He points to that creepy image of the old man with the dead monster he just slaughtered at midnight. He told us he knew that when the creature popped out of the building, this guy wasn't just a regular worker. He was a foreign specialist with elite training in how to handle dangerous situations right on the job site. Chongding plays along as if he were reading a broadcast from a distant shore, yet his voice carries the weight of a news anchor delivering real information while secretly trying to keep everyone in the dark. The hero grinned wildly as he spotted the monster's new superpower, its lights turning bright enough to make the crowd look like they were at the very top of a ladder. The boy decided to team up with everyone else this time to fight for those extra supernatural rewards. Chongding was a bit skeptical about his own reasoning and then agreed with the new idea right away. When Teacher Tao walks in with a stern look, she stops the bell chime and gently whispers, "Don't believe anything you hear about online. Just listen carefully to what your teacher says." Chongding whispered that if 3 more days passed before she made a decision, She'd finally realized something important was happening inside her head. The words he spoke drew the eye of a curious student, but also sparked doubt in the chittering crowd, leaving everyone else completely uninterested. As the clock ticks past a moment that feels too long for real life, the dismissal bell rings softly and cheerfully, leaving time to drift away in its own way of being an empty cup. Teacher Tao takes a deep breath of relief as he explains to his students that all the crucial information for this exam will be right here on the desk. He was about to celebrate when he realized he had been called out by a grumpy old man, and the world felt too quiet for anyone else to hear it before they all left. Chong Ding stared at the word like it was a solid rock in his hand, and shook his head frantically until he finally realized he had no idea what to do next. A quiet afternoon at the schoolyard held little groups of children as the air felt still, even though the playground itself seemed almost blank. The lion mane friend stood up suddenly and got very serious, asking himself why Chong Ding looked so blank. The blonde friend started crying as soon as he began to speak about his life together. The lion companion then said heartbroken that their connection had become too one-sided, even though he had been watching her all along. Chong Ding tried to whisper the truth, yet his friend's steady stare kept him from speaking out. The lion mane friend gently pointed out his heart and promised he'd never share that secret with anyone else. As Chong Ding took a step up the ladder, he pointed out to his friend that the guard was watching him carefully. A rock bounced gently before he struck it with such a tiny amount of power that everything exploded into flying shards. A fierce lion master stepped forward, his voice thundering with pure terror as he stared down a massive monster that looked exactly like him. Chong Ding took a deep breath and looked straight ahead as if he was ready to face whatever came next. The air felt heavy with suspense, but his voice remained steady when he finally spoke. "I just killed that beast last night, and it gave me the strength I need now." The lion's eyes sparkled as he pulled his hand out to cheer him on. He felt his arm tracing back through the darkness as if he were hunting down a lost gold coin in Chong Ding's pocket. She looked like she was in a different world, watching everyone else go by without anyone noticing her presence at all. She felt a tiny spark of wonder as she realized how her friends had been watching each other for so long. Chong Ding reassured him that he and his friends would fight together as soon as monsters came to the site next 3 days, ensuring they could all get powerful just like this time. The lion's friendly companion smiled and asked, "How do you know?" He smiled with a sudden twist, but his face remained hidden behind the glass door, so nothing could see him. It was a busy start to the new day as students rushed home from school and crowded back in their classrooms, all while making a big noise in the halls. The lonely Chong Ding stared out from his empty car as a terrifying black hole suddenly materialized beside the old factory 30 miles off the road. He remembered how the old beast's deadly teeth had cut deep into that dark pit, making him think there were only 2 dangerous creatures ready to feast there. A tiny, agile thing with sharp claws, and a mighty monster even bigger than the previous one. The chuckle hit me hard as I watched the 2 guards step forward. First a tiny, barely moving monkey, then a massive man chained to walls by bars of iron that seemed to hum with terrible, crushing power. Chong Ding's steady gaze revealed a deep sense of confidence. Sure, he could crush the monkey and then hold back the rest without losing his temper. As she hurriedly turned around, the old lady shouted her name again and again, eager to see him. Aunt Wong had been rushing with a sudden jolt of emotion as he stepped into the room, smiling gently before turning to ask why her schedule felt so tight. The old woman slammed her hands together against the table, a breathless sigh escaping her lips before she finally nodded and turned toward the kitchen. Frowning at the sudden reappearance of his uncle, Chong Ding questioned whether anyone else had shown up. She paused, sighing softly, reminding him that she was right. She had always been smart and knew exactly what the truth was about. She gently touched his shoulder, assuring him she understood the problem, even though she had accepted her concern for the moment, but would still protect the home at all costs. Aunt Wong sighed softly as she watched the young man's figure fade away, feeling deeply sorry for his unwise choice to leave. Meanwhile, that once quiet Chong Ding's home was suddenly full of 2 unexpected guests. 2 men were sprawling on a dirty sofa, leaving a mess of trash and booze all over it. A red-haired boy munching on peanuts and whispering that Chong Ding had disappeared left him feeling suspicious of who else he could trust. He looked down at the empty glass and smiled, telling himself that no matter how long he stood here, nothing ever really mattered. The family's lawyer got angry when he saw the old man leave the room with his heavy bag in hand. Smugly sounds too much like a crime story, so let's make it sound more natural. He pulled out a crumpled will, secretly, and declared that now the house belonged to him and his son. The door groaned open and the laughter echoed as they realized their friend had finally come home. Chong Ding stepped into the room and immediately felt a surge of anger as he saw the mess. He stood up, his face burning with rage as he pointed a finger at them while yelling about trespassing and ruining the area. A loud, angry scream erupted as the boy pointed directly at the man and cursed furiously. A sudden hand halted the aggressive action in his hand. The old man stepped forward and said gently, "Chong Ding, we've seen how much forgiveness you offered before. I think it's time for you to go." He nudged the doorframe with a hand that felt warm and inviting, whispering, "Let's get going and take care of ourselves." He handed out a handful of cash, but the change was mere $50, what he called goodwill. The quiet room, filled with his own silence, made the son shout loudly again, shouting that Chong Ding must leave immediately as he exposed his false documents to steal the family's money. The words he said hit hard and made the old man furious, causing the man to scream that he was going to sue him about it, proudly mentioning his network just in case. Chong Ding froze in horror as the cold whispered, "Your father's life was worth more than anything else." His piercing look told everyone his mother had managed to handle 4 different jobs all at once. Yet when she was alone with her children, she found herself just drinking, stealing, and bringing shame in her wake. The elderly man refused to accept that he owned the house. So instead of leaving quietly, he sued anyone who would force them out. His face twisted into a grim smile as he pointed out how selfish their love was. Then his voice rose in venomous anger as he said, "Our family just wants to own the house. You deserve nothing but death." He marched straight into the house to shout that everyone was dirty and rude, even treating his parents like spoiled children he couldn't handle. Chong Ding screamed hard, yanking the words out of his throat and shoving them aside, as if they were a trap he couldn't handle anymore. The guy felt like he'd broken the ice with someone who looked too serious, so he turned his back on his friend and laughed at their jokes. He leaned against the stone wall and tilted his head up, looking down with an air of superiority, while the elderly man asked, "Will you strike him?" Chong Ding marched toward his son with a grin, but he soon found himself shouting in a fit of pure excitement about the upcoming fight, knowing he would definitely die if the boy dared to resist. Chong Ding threw an incredible punch and smashed the old man right in the face. He crashed into the corner and screamed in agony. Seeing his dad dragged into the fight, the boy slammed onto the floor, screaming while he yanked on the bottle. Before he could touch him, the sudden blow knocked him straight down onto his back, sending him sprawling with an impossible amount of pain. His body flew right up against the glass and clutched his belly in agony as the world faded away. In his worst nightmare, he kept threatening to call the police so he could be jailed. Chong Ding sneered and walked confidently into his room without even looking back at the hallway. A bitter fight broke out between a tough dad and his kid as they tried to hide away by tying himself up right behind the police boss's office door. As he silently tucked away their names while clutching a new, terrifying wave of doom, his eyes burned with rage and shame for the one man who once taught him to read the stars before the storm. Once Chong Ding was fully prepared, he carefully stepped out from the shadows of his living room. He told them the trip would end in 3 short days if they didn't get right this moment. Then he pulled his cloak off and stepped forward, letting the 2 vicious men stare at him with eyes full of worry. Old man held face, surprised and thought he'd lost touch with the house debate. He snapped at his son and told him straight away that he had to get the head of security called right now. That night inside the shining luxury hotel, Chong Ding hurriedly packed his bag and asked the receptionist for a big room for 3 nights. The friendly lady smiled up at him and said she could arrange some wonderful massage services that have special abilities. The guest looked at his face in horror as he saw how the place seemed so close to death. Yet, the only thing keeping him away from a certain doom was the very place itself. A receptionist was teasing and pulling away, hoping the man would enjoy his attention. She smiled gently as she walked him through the door, but he suddenly snapped his fingers and grabbed her wrist, forcing her back into the room while looking for something inside. The darkened rooms hummed with whispered secrets as a low, urgent whisper drifted through every hallway corridor, making the silence feel heavy and tense before the lights dimmed completely. His heart broke in a terrible way as he screamed about the noise while turning away at the door. He sat hugging that soft pillow and silently told himself to wait out the 2 remaining days with calm strength. The door crackled open and a terrified scream tore through the next room, forcing him to sit up straighter and feel even hotter. In yet another quiet spot where everyone was getting impatient, Mushu and Aunt Bai were both staring at the ceiling in silence. Aunt Bai leaned back in her chair to read, whispering softly about how she felt like a bird near its nest, then encouraging the girl to trust that place where the treasure waited. Mushu's grumpy expression turned into a glare of pure fury as he stared down at the floor. Aunt Bai asked, "Did she tell me this was a good thing?" The old aunt held up her finger, whispering that the play must end before time ran out to see if they could survive. Mushu stood up in her anger, shouting back at her aunt with a scowl so big she nearly knocked it off her face. Aunt Bai chuckled as she caught her cousin making a loud, grumpy noise. She spoke with serious conviction about how a bizarre world had appeared, promising to destroy all of those strange monsters for good. She stood up to speak firmly, telling herself that a life of total independence would take all the effort she needed at once. Mushu slowly shook his head, forcing himself to maintain that eager but stiffly polite smile as if he were about to help someone fix a broken chain. Sudden, as if a bell rang, Aunt Bai turned her head and grinned while pointing toward the next room with a wink about how the chaos had finally died down perfectly on its own. Mushu blinked and yelled at her uncle, "What? You want to see your aunt?" 2 days later, at midnight, the site fell silent as cold winds howled through the empty air like ghosts. As the cool moonlight slipped through the window, two mysterious shadows stepped into the room from the darkness. Leaning Chungwu held his tightest as he looked around for safety in the dark. He grinned reassuringly, telling him the tough monster wouldn't touch him without his own shield protecting himself instead. The old man leaned against the wall, sighing and mumbling as he tried to quiet Chungwu's frantic mind. Yet Chungwu abruptly pointed out that they had to catch the monster before they could move away. His heart sank when he heard the teammate smile so calmly after a betrayal, but instead of tears, he felt hope. He looked at his phone to find only 30 minutes left before a storm of rivals would ambush him as he worked out strategic plans for the abyssal breed. He sighed sharply as he decided that even a sneaky intruder couldn't get away, so he looked at the threat above him with a grim look as he thought about what could happen if this tough Tier 2 monster didn't take its own life first. Planning was interrupted by a sudden noise that froze the air, and then Lin Chongwu abruptly shut his mouth, cutting the conversation short before it could continue. Chong Ding stopped mid-step and immediately seized Lin Chongwu by the throat before he could fall back against the wall, shielding them from the chaos. The desolate landscape made Aunt Bee and Moo vanish from view, yet their sudden reappearance startled a young boy named Lin Chongwu, who then whispered a strange recognition. Chong Ding stepped back from the wall and watched, his eyes wide with shock as he realized he couldn't shake away the idea that everything was wrong in the first place. Suddenly, after thinking for another minute, the realization hit him hard with clear eyes. Chung Wu felt bewildered because the news wasn't about a giant monster. It was just that his friends had gotten hurt while hunting. She nervously shouted at Mushu, then smiled reassuringly and gave him a warm hug before he could move on. Chung Wu couldn't help but whisper that the mysterious woman he found nearby was actually quite dangerous, though she looked just like one of those special forces teams. He kept whispering to the two women, hoping that one of them could finally unlock a secret ability. He stepped down with icy silence and told everyone he wouldn't give up on the top-tier beast for anyone else. Soon after, the team slipped quietly into the hidden vault of the weird beast. Aunt Bai asked if Mushu was sure a monster would actually come out of that weird spot in the cave. Aunt Bee watched closely as the world began to shift around her when the creature first appeared, relying entirely on her sharp mind to track the invisible warning signs before they could strike. She told her team that the strange monsters in the forest were built like giant machines with superpowers, making them incredibly tough to take down. Aunt Bee held her gun ready and carefully told the boy that she was going to make a homemade bomb just big enough to hurt the monster, though she wasn't sure if it could actually stop it from killing him right away. One day, when the dragon got hurt, anyone who could help would make it to the finish line by giving him his final weapon. Mushu held his stance hard as the final shot in hand, ready for the mission. The two people stood in the shadows below, watching as Chun Chong-woo felt a little too nervous to ask them to wait alone. Chong Ding leaned forward with a cold smirk, daring anyone to say they'd find another path than the one he chose. Lin Chong-woo let out a breath of relief as he realized the truth, pressing his lips together to admit defeat and finding himself completely powerless against whatever was happening now. Chong Ding watched quietly as the battle began, knowing it would be the last straw for his own team. He looked at the numbers as if to say, this bomb is actually pretty good at hurting Tier 1 people. But when he saw Tier 2s, he knew this was a disaster plan that would just kill everyone in the neighborhood. For those who use guns, it's a no-brainer. For him, though, it's a serious mistake because Tier 2s are so hard to hit that his team could actually be saved by using the bomb correctly. After Chong Ding's first wound healed, he instantly focused all his energy on finishing the second fight before even noticing the other hero's move came into play. The clock struck 23:59 seconds before the last beat could finish. Aunt Bai grabbed the detonator tight and shivered with worry, tallying every heartbeat as she stepped toward the machine. The mighty roar of the word zero cut through the air, and both of them stood tall, with eyes glowing bright as they decided to burn away the dark creatures hiding in that place. The ground suddenly revealed a blazing red formation, terrifying to behold. A mighty surge of energy slammed into the void, as if nature itself were throwing its arms around a storm to bury away our world. The mist began to lift, letting two terrifying monsters emerge, one massive, one tiny, to be greeted by a laugh from both of them. Chong Ding stared blankly at the sky and muttered under his breath that they had all gone crazy about this new city. Aunt Bai's hand slammed into the button with force as she yelled, "Go!" before her heart began to race. A loud boom blasted through the air, sending a shower of smoke and dust everywhere. The fog rolled over the village, and Aunt Bai thought her plan was done, so she gently told Mushu he could move on. From that thick pile of smoke, the huge sea creature kept roaring, its face burning bright red with rage as it churned through the dark. Aunt Bai froze, immediately clutching her own wound as she realized who was hurt the most. Only one person had actually sustained a serious injury. There was a tiny figure that had fallen onto the dirt and was completely still. He laughed loud and charged the massive beast with a roar that seemed to shatter its own frame. Aunt Bai charged forward with incredible strength and a terrifying reflex, yet her arrow missed the monster entirely. Instead, he just sat there, unmoving. It was a blazing fire that made Yebi jump back, shivering as he dragged Mu away in the chaos. It seemed like a massive wave of energy rushed out and swallowed the two of them all at once. He slammed her hand down and caught the blow with an instant reflex before the beast could reach her. He went down to grab a massive rock. He kept her guard up while a massive rock launched right at her back, shattering her hardened shield mid-swing. You punch hard while he suffered, yet he kept urging Mu to leave before too much hurt took hold. The heavy fall knocked the air from her lungs, leaving her legs trembling like wet leaves and barely able to hold herself up. The UN crew tried hard but couldn't save him, so the monster launched a deadly strike that knocked Mu right back into his chair for a scream of pure panic. He collapsed and screamed helplessly, his hands flying around his face as he sobbed aloud, convinced that if he didn't stop the bleeding now, he'd be dead. At that moment, the world shifted unexpectedly. A mighty figure named Chong Ding surged forward and unleashed a barrage of powerful combat skills upon his opponents. His thunderous punch slammed a giant monster right against a wall while he roared in agony as the impact shook everything. She screamed and fell backward into the darkness, collapsing in a panic like she was about to turn a corner. Chong Ding stood frozen, his fists tight and shaking as he remembered the burning pain that had been there all along. She slowly opened her eyes and let the tears fall as she stared into the darkened space where her savior awaited. Seeing her stay safe, he suddenly broke down crying and shouted her full name. He looked down at the two of them crying, but decided to pull away, treating their sadness as a small mistake because that Tier 2 monster just kept coming after them. She cried again as the girl watched her shyly ask why he was here. She froze in place, his hand still pressing against hers as he warned her to pull away right away. As he stopped running, a loud roar erupted from the beast, and it sprinted toward him again. The plane shot down the target like a lethal bullet meant to end this city. He slammed his hands hard against the steel bars and yelled, "I'm gonna crush this. Push me back," before slamming himself onto the ground with a final, crushing blow that shook every room in the hall. He had a superpower that made him feel like an unstoppable force, sending his entire team right off the horse and into the air with a mighty roar. But he looked so drained and shaky as he tried to think about that extra power, wondering if the tenfold gain really matched what he had just lost. He didn't hesitate at all, so as soon as he raised his hands, a burst of electric blue fire erupted from his fingers to wrap around his eyes, making them look like thick iron bars. The scary monster stopped and stumbled back into the shadows, terrified of what was coming next. He charged forward with fierce determination, not because of weakness, but to secure the finish line in one swift burst. A razor-sharp blade in his hand sliced directly into the creature's flesh with a terrifying precision. The terrible, agonizing screams of the dying creatures filled the void with a mournful roar that seemed to vibrate in every ear. Suddenly, a strange aura erupted, marking the end of something important before it could die. The game officially started with the mission to kill the highest-tier monster, and the player finally reached their goal. The darkness swallowed him whole, and he was alone in a whispering fog where his monster had already faded away like smoke. It spun into black and dusted with ash, leaving behind a tiny, bright bone piece that glowed like a beacon in the dark. They both stared in awe at that mysterious object that looked exactly like a door in the wall. The plan went exactly right so much that he felt so happy now. He laughed out a slow smirk as he looked at his team, wondering what he'd done to make them hesitate before they could move down. The other guy got a serious look and yelled, "Why didn't he act?" He sneered while seeing his team member do a genuine no-no job. The friend, feeling hurt and angry, shouted back, "I'm really getting bullied unfairly." The quarrel ended with a massive shove, and that frightened man decided to go down instead of getting up. In the wake of panic-ridden screams, they both fell heavy, but he immediately grabbed his team first, pulling the last rogue beast toward him with an icy command. Suddenly, that loud voice came from the dark, instantly drawing everyone's attention to what was happening right now. The man stepped forward, his face a mask of icy concern as he asked, "Why weren't we ever supposed to leave?" The little girl leaned in and said, "Thank you so much, sir," while the old man smiled warmly back. He suddenly snapped his fingers and shoved them away, shouting clearly, "No more sharing." The old man didn't back down. He launched into an explosive demand that was impossible to ignore. He felt a little uncomfortable and asked softly, "What were you really thinking?" Without hesitation, he pointed the sharp blade at his friend's face, sternly urging him to stop and act right away. Chung Wu didn't pause. He immediately tightened the grip of his blade and pulled himself forward. He charged straight at the elephant and vanished from view before anyone could react. The moment came, and the system declared triumphantly, "Congratulations! ID 1666 has cleared the tough Tier 2 UN breed." As he had no other choice but to panic because this was his very first time doing so, Chung Wu scrambled to shout out over what just happened. Chong Ding stepped forward and frowned, clearly trying to tell someone they shouldn't get too excited at all. The moment Mu noticed no need to wait for further hesitation, he gently pulled E toward him and spoke softly in her ear, saying, "You're going home now." She said he was smarter than everyone else, so she didn't even bother asking him to do anything instead of hoping he would come to her every time. She also promised payment on his terms, so Chong Ding fell into the deep silence of that thought. He smiled gently while emphasizing that any chance could be taken right here in the city. Chong Ding paused and hesitated, thinking back over the options before they could actually go. He said, "We have to get out of here," with a quiet, calculated confidence in his voice. The moment he heard the news, Bid's smile widened to show genuine satisfaction. "If I change my mind now, she could be with me anytime." As the team finally decided to pull out, Xiao felt a deep sense of relief and peace settle over him. Chung Wu wasn't sure yet, but Chong Ding already said, "Take this. It belongs to you." He took a big bite of the core and then swallowed right before doing anything else. And instantly, his body surged with explosive power and energy like a thunderclap that shook the room around him. This new superpower made her look like a goddess with 10 times more muscle and 10 times sharper eyes. She could lift objects up to the size of trucks, feel heat in your face faster than normal, and even double back when you try to run away. As sweat oozed out his face during that sudden shift, a faint smile played on his lips like a happy cloud. He whispered that even with only a tiny extra 10%, he felt like he had finally won the big game. He looked at the stunned Chung Wu with a firm voice and asked, "What special power do you have?" He scratched his head and replied, "Eagle Eye," realizing that the vision was so wide it seemed completely useless. Chong Ding felt the weight of the sound and immediately patted Chung Wu's shoulder, declaring it a magnificent treasure and having the boy instantly find it funny to listen to. He said he needed both skill and a gun, handing the weapon over to him instead. The system loaded. You're standing on the first floor of a massive factory with 500 minions in front of you, shooting down at them with that cool 500 minion range and a base damage number of 10%. It also makes sure they burn up quickly and slows them down by 10% each time you fire. And hey, this thing's got those little fire bullets ready to go. Chong Ding smiled over his book and said, "These numbers are so solid." He then turned up a really interesting angle when he saw what Chung Wu's secret weapon actually did. Chung Wu stepped into the spotlight with a newfound confidence, and his team hit that fifth shot for an incredible 100% accuracy while delivering just over 100% of the damage possible. Chong Ding waved a friendly hand over Chung Wu's shoulder as he shook his head in disbelief and replied, "All thanks to you." Both of them shared a warm hug as they settled into the plan to build something new for tomorrow. The street was a busy sea of faces and cars as we walked along. The driver drove carefully and apologized profusely for not helping Mu activate her special ability properly. The clan leader heard about Chong Ding's crime and told her she was ready to find out exactly what happened in no time at all. Bid looked at the empty space where the phone was and said, "I guess I should just go home." They both walked into the hotel together that evening. The moment the dishes cleared away, they both slipped into their quiet corners of the room. Chung Wu jumped in wonder at the place, and Chong Ding chuckled, telling him this had been his favorite spot. He then kept asking about how much was left over from a last donation. Ding felt like money was going to disappear anytime soon. Suddenly, Chung Wu grinned wildly and made the others jump in fear. Chong Ding felt a sudden chill, and his heart began racing as he looked at Chung Wu, who suddenly laughed with an almost mocking tone, suggesting Chong Ding had walked into trouble instead of making it right. Then the door clicked open with a loud thud, and someone walked in carrying a tray of delicious food. Chong Ding sprinted over the table so fast that he almost knocked his friend off, whispering urgently, "Eat, rest," before he could finish his sentence. He leaned forward, and just then, a pair of high heels stepped out from behind him, making him turn his head quickly in alarm. She looked at him with those eyes, and he smiled back. The two paused mid-sentence, their faces frozen together in a quiet, awkward silence waiting for something to happen next. Chong Ding stumped by embarrassment and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. As she closed the door and spoke out, her voice was full of pride. He stared at that empty sky as the sun went down during lunch. Liu Yui's name sounded like the big green sun that had been waiting for everyone to look at. When it flashed bright green across the sky, a whisper whispered, "Earth has turned into a war zone, shattering our calm and making us realize that now we are fighting for survival." The world gathered in frantic meetings as the crisis grew urgent and dangerous. When the world began to see the blueprints of a new United Nations, people suddenly found themselves with much greater powers, and society turned into something entirely different. 5 powerful nations came together to build a new army of special forces and military training schools. Chong Ding felt utterly defeated as the scientists tried to build a weapon that would destroy the world, yet their work turned out barely more than a joke. While chewing loudly, Chong Wu kept asking everyone in the group how many people wanted to know his personal rank. Chong Ding sighed softly while watching the scoreboard and told Chong Wu that only a few hundred people worldwide made it to the final round. As he began speaking, a sudden strange thought popped into his mind instantly. Chong Wu gasped as he heard the news and felt a surge of confidence, ready to crush everything ahead. The man looked completely stunned as he heard the chopstick gesture from a stranger. Even someone with such a strange skill would find it amusing enough to make him smile, along with his confusion. Chong Ding slammed the plate shut as he sprinted toward the door. Watching the man step away from him, Chong Wu shook her head and nodded firmly at the truth before she turned around to continue her investigation. It made him feel like he had 2 broken pieces in his chest, making him deeply sorry that it was not him who caused the trouble. That night a stranger called out to tell her about a girl who lived nowhere near where they were staying, and then the only thing she could do was look around at everyone else in the crowd. She looked like a foreigner often staying in the house, though nobody really knew her. Her striking appearance seemed to suggest a grand destiny that felt even more mysterious than that of the world around her. Chong Ding laughed hard when she heard the voice, proving she had indeed found out. The landlord watched with wide eyes as she burst into laughter, wondering exactly why a stranger would ask him so directly about her own happiness. She didn't even care when he said she needed a specific room. He was just demanding the number himself. The landlady turned away when a customer asked for their details, though she quickly began smiling as they handed over the cash. She laughed and showed me the number 502. Chong Ding picked up his number card and flashed a warm smile at the woman beside him, waving it back with gratitude, as if she had just forgiven him for mocking her. He stepped onto the metal doors of the elevator and let his mind dive straight into the dark silence below. The news was that a group of people were claiming the entire universe had only 12 superpowers at their disposal, which told everyone to be careful before they tried to use them without permission. The group known as 12 Celestial Stars had the power to turn cities into ash. One of the top 5 people in the group had a scary scorpion kick and was named right next to her. She had never known who she was before, yet her spine held a jagged scar of the rose mark from before. The scorpion woman was cruel to men, enjoying humiliation and keeping the male scar believed to stem from a tragic past around her neck. He walked slowly as Chong Ding scanned the room, checking her face for any clues before realizing she wasn't just a normal woman, but a dangerous scorpion in disguise. He paused in front of room 502, wondering if his guess might be correct. She looked at him with a worried expression because talking about his partner felt like a bad idea when she was afraid that his friends might hate what he had to do for her. He stumbled back as the door flew wide open with a loud thud. A graceful beauty stepped out from the shadows with wide eyes filled with a sudden, wonderful surprise. You saw that familiar face back at the start of the meeting. Chong Ding froze as he saw the girl staring at him. Then his heart sped up, and he immediately pulled a friendly hug from behind her back to make sure she was safe before rushing forward with a big smile that made her laugh. She moved forward, brushing against his cheek as she whispered, "Follow me." He froze, acting strangely as if refusing to answer. Then, her voice cut through him. "The cost is 3,000 a session, no discount." Chong Ding panicked and scrambled away, shouting that a big mistake had gone wrong because his friend didn't know what to do. The girl watched him leave quietly and said, "I can't stay here anymore." Back in a quiet room, Chung Wu lay totally still as Chong Ding sat by his side, letting out a soft sigh before whispering softly that he would wait patiently for 8 o'clock. Time flew by so quickly that it had already passed 7 minutes past 7, leaving the sleepy Chung Wu barely awake again. He watched Chong Ding quietly by the window and asked himself why he felt so tired before he finally called for help. He coldly said, "Only 1 minute remains," without turning around as his friend Chung Wu panicked and scrambled for the answer. As he was about to finish the task, his face turned a bright shade of red instantly. The sky stayed perfectly empty for a moment, keeping the world quiet and peaceful like before. Right after, the whole space suddenly turned a deep, vibrant green like a living leaf. Chong Ding felt it clearly and solemnly declared that the beginning truly had arrived. A shimmering layer of deep green fog rolled through the whole city at once, making every street look like a secret tunnel waiting to be discovered. They thought they were watching magic spells, rubbing their eyes in disbelief as strange colors seemed to have taken over the sky. A whisper of noise swept through every corner as people gathered around to see if the event was real, with some thinking their eyes were watching and others fearing a fake show had been staged. As a soft green light rushed out from behind the clouds, it engulfed the whole city and made everyone feel safe. It was dark and cold, yet Teenier's tired eyes lingered over a luxury hotel in the distance as she tried to catch her breath after losing hours of sleep last night. Her face instantly grew pale as she saw something very unusual happening nearby. It was a strange feeling she felt when she remembered that a doctor once told her clearly, "Never mind if cancer causes blindness in the future." As if she could hear him, she closed her eyes to catch the green light before it vanished like a scorpion's tail. It seemed like Tion looked at nothing but this single figure standing alone in the distance. Her trembling body seemed almost empty. She fell completely off balance and crumpled onto the floor, unable to move again. Chong Wu watched from the top of the mountain as he muttered quietly in his head that he was ready for battle. Suddenly, a weird whisper echoed out loud, telling everyone to laugh at themselves as they woke up in the morning. The story whispered about a special gift that Chong Ding and Chong Wu secretly received as they listened quietly to it. The voice kept its sharp growl, whispering that someone had seized control long past any normal limits. It jumped out as a news that the game will start tomorrow. The name given to this ancient clash between masters and beasts was the abyssal breed battle of wits. He turned to reveal that the earth wasn't normal. Instead, it was a magical cage named the Abyss where wild creatures like Yuans were born and died. The announcement made a chilling promise. Killing the United Nations could unleash extraordinary and terrifying power. Elsewhere, Bid and Mu listened intently as they saw a shadowy force emerge from nowhere, capable of appearing in any code number between 1 and 99. Every single one of those spots was actually made by a tiny creature from the wilds, and each one could be up to 9 different types of animals. It didn't matter if the other humans were okay with the war. We had to get rid of every human being who could hurt any of them, or else humanity would lose its fight. His voice dropped into a low growl, whispering that if they couldn't save the world, Earth would simply feed on them instead of him. Oh no, he snapped at the boss for showing so much of what was inside. He wanted to make everyone happy while playing the game. And then the sound of the voice faded away. Both Chong Ding and Chung Wu were completely stunned when they heard the news. When the chaos of panic seized Chung Wu, he scrambled out his chair to ask himself, could humanity ever truly defeat this? Chong Ding stared wide-eyed at the empty table, completely lost in his own silence. Countless chaotic memories flashed through his mind as he gave every ounce of effort to face it, but with that fierce determination and cold sweat cracking on his neck, he confidently said, this time would surely succeed. In yet another quiet corner of the room, a group of figures gathered and talked softly while staring at each other. Muigwa said the clues from the investigations pointed to Earth being pulled into a strange and unpredictable power that had never been seen before. Zhou Wanli shouted, there's no monster who can take that much hot fire. Before he could finish a sentence, a massive explosion tore through the city as the army moved in to crush everything. Zhang Wanfang stood firm in the face of a threat that seemed to come from deep within the water, where vast, shadowy creatures were trying to stop tiny guns. Next time he warned that the enemies could still fight back with anything but their usual steel. A man stepped in to ask if anyone had a better way out. He carefully pulled on his glasses and spoke in a calm voice while he began to gather everyone who could use their powers into one powerful team for the next challenge. Wei Guo nodded and asked Wanfang to take over leading the army's power users. He looked at Wan Li and told him to keep his family safe while the world got messy. The news made everyone's voices join in a loud chorus of support and understanding. As Chong Ding and Chong Wu walked side by side while the world began to build a new anti-ABSSAL organization, they paused mid-stride to talk about what would happen next. Chong Wu looked surprised as he heard the news and wondered whether anyone would actually come to the table. Chong Ding stood firm against the idea of joining a mercenary crew, arguing that instead of being part of an organization he didn't belong to, he could just fight alongside anyone who needed him. He remembered how his hero was trapped inside a machine he couldn't open, promising never to do anything like that again. Watching his head from the new government office gave him a feeling of both relief and danger as he watched other officials plan to change everything for themselves. Chong Wu narrowed his eyes and whispered, "What exactly do we need to pick?" Chong Ding stayed still while waiting for the answer to the terrifying news that the abyssal creatures were coming back in 6 months. He looked down at his own face with a worried expression, knowing that talking about their personal lives now would be too late if they weren't trained properly before even seeing them again. She whispered loudly and pointed her finger at him, asking if anyone was actually going to help her uncle when he tried to leave the house. His face went into a sudden, heavy shadow, as if he were about to snap a tear out of his eye. Chong Wu grabbed his friend's arm and whispered, "I'm not leaving you behind if we don't make our hero plans a reality." He looked at him with eyes full of hope for a world saved together. At her innocent words, he felt a sudden knot of awkwardness and was unsure how to respond. His lips twitched in relief as he relaxed into a comfortable spot. It was a night like nothing else in the chaotic room as someone shouted bitterly that justice had completely vanished when monsters came along and destroyed his whole new life. Clinging to the cold steel of that beer, and while yelling at a stranger, he felt angry about how he stole his own happiest moment. His gentle words told him that life hung in the balance, and he had to act quickly to make a difference. Suddenly, the man stumbled to his feet and shouted. The boy's tolerance vanished instantly. As the father stared down at his trembling son with utter disbelief, the silence stretched long and heavy over the room. Suddenly, the blade flashed in front of him, and he scrambled back with panic. Chong stepped forward, and his piercing blue ice glinted in his frozen gaze, signaling that he had now become the one to take the wheel. The man hesitated, stepped back, and yelled, "No, they did commit murder." He then spoke softly, calm as ever, but his voice shook with fear. He knew, and so, tremblingly, he admitted it was the other's uncle, begging that blood ties should stop him from doing such a thing. The new kid smirked at me with a grin of pure disdain as he leaned back in my chair and laughed off the insults. When he exploded and screamed at avenge, his wife died from betrayal, while the entire family vanished to ruin her assets before she even knew what happened. He looked around and said, "I doubt anyone ever gets the chance if their family doesn't want peace or a promise from their mom." He collapsed in tears and pleaded with God for mercy, revealing a shocking truth about the world. As a sword herald who had been ignored, he pulled out his axe and declared, "Forgiveness belongs to my mother's blood," before vanishing into the fog. A man dropped from the sky and cried out in terror, screaming that he could not believe someone had actually killed his mother. The question froze the blade-wielding man into a silent shock. A tearful man cried as he whispered, "Who did it? It killed my mom." At that very second, a surge of raw anger flared in the sword-wielding man's heart, forcing him to shout out exactly whom he wanted to talk about. Hasty as he replied, the man said, "It's the grandchild of a high-ranking official called Wong who got drunk enough to hit his mother right there in the middle of the fight." It was one of those rare moments when the world feels too loud for your voice, so you slowly lowered your hand as the whispers began to fill the hall. You watched the official whine slide down with strange grace, then realized that person had used it just to make everyone feel better about themselves all along. When the voice spoke up, the man with the sharp blade felt a chill run down his spine as he slowly pulled out his hand and said, "Finally, I understand this mystery." The man paused mid-speech as the crowd gasped, his voice dropping low before he turned back toward the exit and hurriedly said, "Nothing more." He stepped out and looked down at the victim with a smile as his heart told him, "Don't be careful." A sudden jolt of terror swept through him as his eyes rolled wide in horror. He gasped for air as his body gave way under the weight of a sudden scream of agony. He felt a sudden rush of pain as the steel bit through the very back of his spine. Chong Ding stood there with a face twisted into that sharp, cold grin, as if ready to strike back immediately after hearing the sound of something unexpected. At that moment, Li Chung Wu stepped out to find his uncle lying across the floor with a gash across his neck full of blood. Calmly, Chong Ding looked away as Chung Wu rubbed his eyes in confusion about the sudden change in scenery. He waved his hand and ordered a 20-minute break so he could finally let her take in the new power. Soon, both were ready with heavy backpacks on their backs, as if they had been waiting for a very long time. Chong Ding gave a small smile and asked, while Chung Wu replied with a bright smile she had been well prepared for. Together they clapped their hands together so loud they shouted out to leave at the same time. 10 days later, the driver of the black car sped recklessly down the deserted highway. It felt like a wild adventure when Bid drove by chatting with Mu, who was so shocked to hear Chongding finally agree to join the monster hunts. As Mu spoke, he stayed completely hidden in his own thoughts, letting the excitement of the hunt take over the day without him even noticing. The guy frowned as he checked all the wires, though he'd never figured out how to find Chongding's source, so he knew for a fact that his own journey is wild and unforgettable. Mu paused mid-speech and pointed dramatically toward that old factory ruin, where he had finally found his answer to a question that hadn't even been asked yet. A blond youth stood rigidly on the factory gate, eyes locked on the dark figure who had just appeared behind her, ready to catch up with her in a moment. They finally stopped right in front of him, leaving the rest of their world waiting behind them for a moment before he walked past. The blond man stepped out from behind his cover and greeted you warmly, radiating that confident smile as if ready to talk business right away. They looked at that mysterious thing with wide eyes like they were holding something big and weird before their eyes. A pause followed by a soft gasp. Mu felt the recognition settle into his chest. In her mind, a twisted image of Leon Chung Wu flashed before her eyes, a mutilated face that made her weep in shock. He leaned casually against the column, winking softly and teasingly to make sure his friends never figured out who he really was. The man in the blue suit reached out and brushed a stray hair from the top of his head while looking down at his hands, wondering if he could really reshape himself into something else completely. However, the change felt far too extreme for him to handle right now. A heavy bag was launched straight at your back like a stormy sky above. He caught the ball as it crashed right next to them. Chongding stepped aside with a calm and icy attitude, gently reminding Leo that he was too smart for this kind of trouble and needed to get inside his car instead. He paused, tucked his stuff into the back of the car, and stepped out to join the rest as one solid unit. A few seconds passed while the man leaned forward in his chair with a smirk on his face, ready to play whatever tricks the other was about to throw around. As the driver continued along the road, she asked a friendly question about Chongding's upcoming plans. The third dark shadow burst from the darkness as dawn approached in City A, where a massive shadow loomed over the Shuang's Neo Huang Tower's basement floor. A firm nod confirmed the target and sent them speeding away instantly. As the evening settled in, a bright moon hung low above the tall roof like a shining diamond against the darkening stars. A shadowy figure of Chongding's group slipped out from their basement, waiting to meet that giant symbol bearing the number 3 just as it appeared. Bang Di screamed in terror as he spotted the dark hole right beside him. Did Chongding ask if the area check had finished? Bang Di firmly confirmed that they had thoroughly searched and found nothing strange at all. Chongding's grin turned serious as he stepped forward, his eyes narrowing because the scary thing was coming up 3 hours soon and he had to manage it all on its own. Leon Chung Wu nudged the back of his own shoulder, jokingly suggesting that perhaps some work belongs with them. Chongding slammed Chung Wu's cheek hard on his chest, shouting sharply about ruining the plan. At midnight, a thick wall of black mist filled the room as it began to rise from the floor. Chongding's icy face flashed with anger when a monster finally made its entrance. The two friends raced to a high wall so they wouldn't fall into the dark tunnels below. The dark mist thickened until a slimy, twisted beast began to emerge from the darkness, its form twisting and shifting in an unsettling way as it crept closer to you. The giant creature roared in terror as soon as it hit the ground, its massive form looking like a dark purple slime with vacant, terrified eyes staring up at you. Chongding stood tall with a smile and quietly told Chung Wu that everything was okay. Chongding held a knife in one hand and pointed a gun to the air while telling Chung Wu about his old tricks. Chung Wu clutched his weapon as the monster revealed a deadly arsenal of sharp acids and spiky tentacles ready to strike back. In that moment, she yelled about severing the tentacles as Chongding delivered the final blow, and the two of them both agreed on it. The terrifying thing in a room had actually been a real monster, and for all its size, it hadn't yet understood that the air around it held something far worse than just flesh and bone. Chung Wu's face turned a scowl of pure disgust as he stared down the word revolt, wondering why his own pride had chosen to make it so unkind. Chongding ordered sharply to finish the job right away because it looked so dirty and scary to do it that. Chung Wu didn't pause. He charged forward with a fierce determination before the creature could even react. She fired a powerful burst from below as the floor groaned under the falling rain of shrapnel that tore through the dark. Threatening tentacles surged forward toward her. She charged and unleashed a brilliant, golden energy that flashed like a dazzling light around her left eye as she screamed, ready to break free from all of its deadly tentacles. Miraculously, when her magic burst free, she saw instantly how all those tentacle arms snapped away right in her direction. Chongding seized the moment and sprinted into the fight, his face grim as he aimed for the target. He leaped high and spun around like a dancer before hitting the monster. He slammed the floor against the wall as he tore through the tentacles, causing them to shriek in horror. You could feel that soft, wet mess still clinging to its skin as it trembled for the rest of its life. The boy stepped forward and shouted loudly at the two girls, urging them to get together. She had jumped like a startled bird when Mu grabbed the knife, but she didn't care about the impact. Instead, she rushed to answer him right away, clutching the blade tightly, as if the moment was sacred. Suddenly, a dark ball rolled forward and slammed into the center of her face, knocking her backward as she tried to grab the weapon before the impact happened. Leaning Chung, Wu yelled in her ear and threw her body wide, as if she were a cat running after a mouse. The other two people froze in their seats, eyes wide as the news reached them, though one of them had already collapsed into a pile of cushions near the door, leaving only the stunned third person standing to watch the scene unfold. A massive explosion tore through the air, kicking up dust that burst into the sky as suddenly as it fell, allowing only a quick glimpse of a hole forming in the earth before a sharp crack echoed from the ceiling. Meanwhile, Bang rolled away and the heavy object beneath him slowly pulled Mu into a safe place under a heavy blanket. When the crowd got nervous because Chongding shouted that a stranger was there, everyone went silent. From the deep shadows stepped a distorted whisper that whispered they'd just been saved. He stepped out of the shadows with a grin so wide it almost hurt his face, shouting that they could leave now while everyone else stayed put. The man held a gun in one trembling hand while clutching another grenade wrapped tightly around his wrist. With a confident tilt of his head, he snapped the weapon shut and shouted, "That's what I got." The oppressive air thickened around us while both sides locked eyes in a deadly stare. Chongding's jaw locked tight as the shadows in his eyes grew heavy and dark. Bang Di stared at the girl, clearly furious because she had been told no one knew she existed. Bang Dala, bowing low as she confessed her error. A grumpy, scarred man sneered, throwing off the mood and saying, "That's not the time for blame. We're all just trying to get out of here." Frowning as if remembering a secret from a storybook, Chongding recalled that somewhere down in the deepest pit of the world, no one had ever stepped foot there. It wasn't until the darkened fifth level that everyone rushed to help, leaving him alone in fear. A mysterious figure emerged from the shadows and walked into the room. He pressed his face close to whisper angrily about why Chongding had never gone home, causing everyone else to think the world was spinning in circles while he waited for the right moment. The scarred man sighed softly and irritatedly asked why he did. Chongding turned his wrist and whispered, "Everything is just a calculation now." He didn't let the air rush through him. Instead, he stiffened and kept staring down like a giant with no idea what was about to happen next. Suddenly, Chongding charged forward in a blur of red and black light, but his hand held up to block the incoming blast. Chongding was taken by surprise when he saw the block. He grinned back at the opponent while pretending he was still a joke of one to another. Chongding sprinted away, ducking under a heavy wall of pressure before turning around to face the shadows ahead. He looked inward and realized his opponent was two things at once. Someone who could pull metal out of their hands like a master manipulator, and someone with a body so strong it shook the air around them. Leon Chung Wu grabbed his fists and screamed, "I'm coming," as he backed into a corner to save himself from the angry crowd. Chung Wu charged out of nowhere and unleashed a torrent of golden bullets that zipped through the air, hitting every enemy with speed. A scar-faced man casually tossed spinning steel balls around like a toy, and everyone got hurt when they hit every single bullet in his way. He laughed as he watched him throw a dozen steel balls at a wall of concrete, mocking how impossible those two guys really were. Leaning Chung Wu gave a proud grin as he stepped forward. She stood tall, screamed at the enemy, then bolted down to fire 5 rounds of deadly bullets that turned into burning embers. The man stiffened and rolled his eyes, treating the idea as a mere joke to throw away. The hero fired a round of steel balls at his target, only for the projectile to pierce him through and hit his own arm. His chest hissed with every puff of air, and suddenly the floor beneath him gave a sharp, crushing thud as the wind rushed in with such force that his entire frame seemed to drop off its balance. He trembled as he clenched his teeth and widened his eyes at the shocking news of being wounded. Chongding moved toward the group with a cool, icy expression, while Lin Chung Wu chuckled in the background as he pointed out that his friend had already lost an arm and was ready to give up everything. He didn't even breathe before the man's roar tore him apart as he flew over his head, charging madly to escape. The dragonfly burst into flight and vanished like a ghost, leaving behind a roar that shook the floor. He went wild and slammed his fist hard against her forehead in the middle of the fight. Lin Chengwu didn't hold back as the bullets shot into the air. The loud scream of Chong Ding echoed through the quiet room as he shouted out his friend's name. The scar-faced man caught him mid-chug, snapping his neck back and forcing him to stop before he hit the ground hard. He smashed the object onto the floor and sent a massive, jarring crack through the air like a gunshot. Ding Chong clenched his mouth tight as he tried desperately to climb higher. He didn't even have time before the man dropped his fist straight for impact. Ding Chong stood tall and raised his hands high as a wall of air, tried to stop the falling dust from hitting him. The talented Song Ting got in a good fight and knocked out his rival by punching him with his own hand to show he was fully capable of beating anyone. He sneered coldly and punched him with such force he ended up barely surviving. When the fight started, he laughed at how weak his rival seemed to be, thinking their superpowers were mostly about raw strength rather than fighting magic or strategy. A powerful blow struck Ding Chong right on the cheek, shattering his composure, and he scowled venomously before turning to his brother, who immediately went into a panic of terror. She shot the man right in his face as he screamed, throwing a weapon into the air before running out of time to stop. In a split second, he slammed into Bing's lower belly, sending her stumbling backward and knocking out the pistol. She held her knife tight against her chest with fierce resolve, yet Song Ting's sharp voice cut through the air, whispering, "Don't get your head knocked out by it." He stepped back, deadpan, telling the crowd that Ding Chang's team was totally shut down, then tilted his head and sneered while joking about how expensive hospitals were. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, startling him. Ding Chong felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Then the air in the corner shifted instantly into a sudden, powerful leap upward as he turned around. The tiny boy's wide eyes shone with fear as the terrifying news hit him. He wasn't dead anymore. He didn't even have time to grab a reaction before he slammed into Ding Chang's punch. His body flew up and crashed hard against the floor. He lay sprawling, battered, and choking on his own air, completely unable to move. Ding Chong held his breath after that last puff of smoke before taking a deep, steady breath again. He sprinted over to where Lion Chengwu was sleeping and called out urgently to get the boy awake. He gently held Chengwu up as he anxiously questioned why his arm hurt so much during that intense fight, while the other guy hesitantly nodded to say it had just ended. His arm twitched a little, whispering that yes, he did work well. Ding Chong looked at Mufu as he held Bing Di ready to grab that chance at destroying the abyssal stone and escaping. Mufu's quick slash ended the creature right away as it shrieked away, leaving behind a shadowy, deep purple void. Ding Chong pulled the unconscious Bing Di close and whispered softly to Mufu, urging him to swallow that heavy stone so he could hide it from everyone else while Ding Chong ran away with the pair. Mu felt suddenly drawn back as soon as he swallowed it, realizing his new strength was about to shine, while Ding Chong gently pulled him away from the bunker, stopping her from rushing to leave. At that exact moment, Ting Ting suddenly woke up with an eye that was as big as a pig's head and a face that felt tight and swollen just right before anyone saw him. His head jerked back as he screamed about the terrifying powers of those two little kids. A few moments later, his friend called out to ask why he had been away for so long and whether there had been any strange news. Ting Ting cried out in agony as a pair of young boys tore into her head, leaving her face completely scarred and broken. He shook, grunted, and finally chose to step away from the chaos of the party, turning his back on the cursed night while a strange silence filled the room. He trudged deep into the dark corners of his shabby apartment at night. Feeling completely angry at the moment, he slammed the heavy door down with all his strength and screamed out in a loud, bitter shout. Myoan's angry roar sent a black-haired man spitting coffee out as he questioned his fate while the red-haired girl laughed along, prompting the man to explain why City it had strange powers that left him in such a ruined condition before she reminded him to wash his face. He sighed angrily as he spoke of the two strange kids who were taking over his life by using guns for money and knocking people out on their knees. Myoan sighed thoughtfully as she watched the knockout power turn into body enhancement, knowing that bringing them together would be an even greater advantage than just luring them to the team. Ting Ting felt compelled to refuse joining in anger, but Myoan sensed a surge of fear and instinctively turned her attention to Hua Hong. Ting Ting jumped over the table, shouting that she was mad because the girl refused to use her real name and was being called Teenier, which she hated even though the girl had swollen up so bad. A hand grabbed Ting's throat with terrifying speed before he could finish. Tian snapped, and his eyes narrowed in warning as he prepared to unleash an instant attack. Ting Ting shook her head and whispered a challenge that sent everyone else on the run, daring anyone to test their limits without fear. They were locked in a fierce fight for the last second as Myoan slammed his hand down on the table, and stopped the clash. He stared blankly at the floor with a hopeless grin, whispering to himself, "If we continue arguing, everyone will have their lives taken away." His words finally stopped flowing, and the room went silent as that powerful energy exploded outward from him in a sudden, violent flash. Teensier and Ting Ting both dropped their heads in fear. Tion grinned as he laughed, thinking the captain had learned tricks for scaring people but was still bound by rules. Ting Ting, though she didn't shout out her curse yet, did slip silently inside and call the man a demonic leader. Muon flashed a smile and then turned down the order with a cold glare, threatening to wipe out anyone who tried to talk them into giving up. Tion's friendly voice made the air feel cool, so he nodded with a smile of his own. That was the first time he saw the sun really shine through that big window in the luxury home. 4 friends gathered around a bed. One named Ding Chong, Jiwoo, Mu Thursday, and B was so badly hurt they were still barely conscious while the doctor checked them and found nothing serious inside of them. She stayed worried because her friend's little bone crack seemed too big to ignore. So when he finally told her it was nothing, she felt like she had won an exciting game of hide and seek. The doctor stepped forward and examined Ziwoo, realizing that all the damage was actually just soft tissue injuries. When the news hit him, Ziwoo felt a spark of fire ignite in his chest and leaped into action, shouting loudly with an unshakable confidence that shook the air around him. Even though he'd casually lifted a plastered arm, the moment the ice cracked on his wrist sent shock waves through him and forced him to stop. The patient Jiwoo pulled a hard hug into his hand while looking at the crowd with eyes full of fear, making it look like all of them were completely unable to help him. The doctor then pointed out that Ding Chong had already given up on being responsible for anything else, even though he just said no. The doctor laughed first before vanishing, leaving Mufu to tell him he'd need help later, and she thanked him silently. Ding Chong smiled and looked at Mu, who just apologized for not having a good day, while she gently held his hand as if nothing had happened. She woke up suddenly and instantly looked around to find out what happened next. At that moment, Mu Thursday jumped up and tried to show her off, which definitely made Ding Chong grin and think she was a genius. She touched her finger, and suddenly the flame exploded outward, glowing brighter than ever before like a burning star. Ding Chong jumped back into shock when the flames ignited, while Zue Wu burst forward with wild energy and bright blue eyes full of wonder. He smiled down at her and said, "I really don't want to believe this isn't just a fire control issue." She surged with strength, lighting up the room as she showed off a mix of wind, water, fire, and crystal to declare her full control over the world's 4 elements. As Ziwu burst into a loud laugh of pure joy, Mu found his heart beating with a steady, happy rhythm in the background. Ding Chong listened intently as he remembered the story of how the elementals were divided into 3 separate groups, each with its own unique power level, rarely found among those who have lived long enough to see their world change hands. This entire tier of superpowers existed only among prodigies who passed away before they could truly shine. Muth smiled as she felt her powers grow stronger because everything around her was spinning in a perfect circle. The clash between fire and ice was a fierce battle for the offensive team's strength. The wood element was here to heal and bring back life. Earth's shield is basically made of pure magic energy. A powerful metal element has been unlocked to give your weapon an extra boost in strength. Ziwu's jealousy made him wonder if swapping power was even possible, yet his friend Ding Chong laughed it off right away. Mu ignored the cold stare of Ziwu and turned his head toward Ding Chong, asking him with a sharp question about his new plan. She frowns a little bit, feeling very suspicious, and wants to get close enough to hear what that important person she holds has in her mind. She told the world that her nation had hired its own elite squad to fight off the ultimate monsters before anyone else even saw them coming. He was offered help by a brave person named Mu to save humanity, yet Ding Chong replied firmly that he would not compromise his principles against the government. He watched in quiet awe as the world rushed toward action from within. The sad warning told everyone that even the strongest people would crumble if they tried to face an abyss alone, leaving them utterly helpless with nowhere else to go. Ding Chong said he'd lose free movement if she kept telling everyone she was working for the team's sake. Mu stubbornly pushed for a breakthrough, yet his hope faded slowly because he stayed completely still and unresponsive. Ding Chong stood firm in his opinion and said, "I'll leave that to you," while the crowd gasped as he refused to submit to the authorities even though they were trying to wipe out all life on Earth. Mu sighed with an easy smile, letting the words sink so quietly that Ding Chong hesitated just to hear him say his own thing. He looked around nervously, whispering that he had nothing left to spend. Mu kept her leader's serious look in her eyes, while firmly stating how much she was prepared to take care of it for him. Ding Chong quietly called out a staggering figure of 100 million, shocking the room instantly. He rubbed his eyes tightly as if trying to forget a massive lie, then slowly lowered the number on his head down to 500 million. Mu stepped forward with a look of suspicion and rushed toward the door to plead his innocence. She saw him stand firm and was so grateful that she finally gave in and asked how much change he wanted before he left. Ziwu looked shocked, his mouth open as if he was about to gasp, while Mu laughed softly and teased back. As he headed off after the party, Ding Chong took out his card and told her to leave him alone. She was suddenly left with a heavy heart because of his serious injury. He felt completely sure now, because all those big cuts had turned into tiny scrapes and weren't a big deal at all. Ziwu stared blankly at the wall, while feeling completely ignored and angry. He still held uneasy doubts, secretly fearing he would use the funds to build his own army. In that next building bathed in a blazing sun, the world changed dramatically. Ding Chong and Ziwu walked happily through the street, while Shiwu kept staring blankly at the towering wall of gold coins. Ding Chong grinned, pointing out that his personal goal had finally changed, and now he was ready to take on an independent team with the necessary funds. Shiwu jumped up and demanded to take on the role of vice captain, while Ding Chong immediately rushed over with his plan to buy the starting base before he even got there. He decided the house had to stay hidden until the storm ended, so it stayed locked away in a secluded mountain valley where no one would know what was happening inside. He looked at Ji Wu carefully as he pointed out how cunning his own heart was. He agreed with that plan because the work was going to take a while, but Ding Chong made sure he stayed on track for the rest of the training session. Ziwu stared blankly at nothing as time seemed to stop completely. Soon after, he roared out his resolve and vowed to finish the job right away. That sunny day felt like a perfect start of the week, filled with bright sunshine and fluffy white clouds drifting lazily above. They lay sprawled on the ground in the training yard, panting heavily after a hard day of drills. In a shocking broadcast on TV, the news team announced that a massive coalition of special forces had been assembled right there to fight the dark forces of darkness and keep our world safe from it all. A news report told us which of the 6 major cities in the country finished their special operations after being named on a list. Ziwu kept shivering while asking if anyone could take them out to watch the event, but Ding Chong snapped out of it and demanded details about the base immediately. Ding Chong knew the news was coming back in a few months, so he felt his own shadow slowly stretching out over him. He burst into action with a loud snap, shouting, "We're leaving today before anyone else." That sudden flash of the long-haired girl hiding behind her icy shadow stole everyone's attention as she stood before them with a chilling presence. The soldiers froze in terror as they drew their swords to face the approaching enemy. The captain was so angry he gave the crew 7 days to explain why they were being punished after their own mistakes. But immediately after she changed her tone,